I know that you guys had said that 2020 was going to be a year of touring. So how did that
Yes.
go?
Yes, needless to say, that crashed and burned. But this is again, this is again why I'm kind of like thankful for maybe the struggles that happened earlier in life for myself. We we were going to be on the road a lot this year. Our first leg of tour was planned for March, and we were going to be out on the road sharing gear and sharing a van and kind of following the same path as this other duo, Quitting Whitney. And the two really, really nice guys, Matt and Ryan. And Matt had put a lot of energy before he even approached me about teaming up with them on this. He had almost an entire tour booked. So it was really an amazing, generous thing for him to reach out. And in exchange, I was just like, okay, well, let me handle at least like the marketing and the logistics, and I'll rent the van and I'll like figure out our hotel routes and like all that stuff. So we did end up dividing and conquer, but I was just going into it feeling really grateful that he had come to me after like having done so much of the work himself. Guy worked really hard to put it together. And simultaneous to that, I was working on booking legs 2 and 3 and thinking about leg number 4. So it really should have been a tour every single quarter for us. Um, and we did leave LA. We went and played our first show in Vegas. We went and played our second in Salt Lake City. The morning after Salt Lake, our Aspen show canceled because they had found a couple. That club had thought everything was going to be okay, but then a couple folks on the slopes tested positive for COVID, and the whole town shut down. Um, our Troubadour show, like our homecoming show, had canceled on our way to Salt Lake, but that made sense to us because the Troubadour is like a 500 capacity venue, and all events above 250 capacity were being just canceled or postponed as a precaution at that time. So we basically diverted ourselves from Aspen to go straight to Denver, which was going to be our next stop after that. And it turned into like an 11-hour drive through a blizzard in southern Wyoming, which was super, super stressful. And just as we were about 20 minutes from our hotel, and Matt checked his email, and the venue Ophelia's in Denver had just canceled our show. So we pretty much were like, okay, this thing is like, the virus is here, it's everywhere, it's spreading. And at this point, like, even if the venues, there were several venues that were trying not to cancel, they were just like, yeah, no, come through, play. And we were just like, we can't really be responsible for people coming and gathering when we know that that is the wrong thing to do. So we pretty much realized at that moment that the tour was not going to happen. And we gave ourselves, like, we got to our hotel, we checked in, and we were just like, let's all take a minute, like maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll meet down at the bar and we'll figure out what we're going to do. Because the choices were drive straight back to LA, which would have taken probably like 30 hours straight, or basically all of our Airbnbs and hotels and whatever, those were all non-refundable reservations because, when you're out on tour, you do it on the cheap, and on the cheap becomes non-refundable. Basically, we decided to follow the original route and schedule of our tour. We were scheduled to play 2 shows in Albuquerque, and we had 3 nights booked at the Airbnb there. So we had a three night, 3.5 day stretch at this one Airbnb in Albuquerque. And number one, we were all feeling very cautious and wanting to be tested before going back to LA. And we were talking with people and watching the news and realized that it was almost impossible to get a COVID test in LA or any of Southern California at that time. And Albuquerque, on the other hand, had accessible drive-through test clinics. So one day we spent 4 hours in a long line of cars and we went and we got tested. They almost didn't test us actually because none of us were symptomatic. And I basically had to plead our case and just be like, look, we've been out on, like, we left literally the day before all of this escalated. We played our first two shows. Um, like, nobody was being careful. Like, we shook people's hands, like, et cetera, et cetera. And we just don't want to bring this home. Like, we're trying to be as careful as possible. Can you please, like, help us out with that? So they basically tested one of us and they were like, you guys have all been in the same van, breathing the same air. If one of you guys have it, pretty much all of you have it. Thankfully, we didn't. And the following 2 days, one of them, we helped Quitting Whitney shoot a music video, and the other one, they helped us shoot a music video. And um, over the course of the drive home, we would find off the highway and just like shoot photos and like whatever. We got to know each other a little bit better. I launched like a behind the scenes community for Ships Have Sailed, kind of just like I was planning it, but it wasn't ready. And I just kind of decided to go live from our Denver hotel room and just tell everybody what was happening and like be like, okay, so we're pivoting. And obviously, like, we weren't expecting shows to be like done for the rest of the year. We were probably thinking a few months at that point, but I was just like, for the next few months, this is what I'm going to be focusing on. If you want to like come check it out and support, then that would be greatly appreciated. A lot of people stepped up and like joined and supported, which was super heartwarming. And that community has grown over the course of the year because shows aren't happening. And so like, I'll do, our full band live stream isn't quite there yet, but I'll do like private acoustic live streams for our um like our fan club and stuff. So really, it was a good lesson in how to pivot and kind of make the most of a really, really awful, disappointing situation. And, frankly, kind of scary too. Like it was pretty unbelievable watching everything change in real time out on the road. Like one morning, we'd like stop at a Starbucks for our morning coffee and everything was fine. And then by afternoon, the next Starbucks that we stopped at, like the tables were like all shoved into a corner with the chairs stacked on top of them and everybody was in gloves and masks. And this was like a matter of hours later, and you get your stuff and you go. Like you can't stay in the coffee shop, right? So like all this was happening in real time and it was a little bit surreal, but end of the day, like what can you do when you can't control an aspect of a situation? All you can control is your reaction to that situation. So we could have driven straight back to LA and been miserable for like 36 hours straight in the van. And instead, what we chose to do was like make literally the most that we could out of the situation that we were in. And I'm super glad that we were out there with Matt and Ryan. Like, I don't think well, that's not true. Humans are resilient and amazing, but like these two were like, when I pitched this to them, they were immediately just like, yeah, that sounds way better. Like, I don't want to be like, you know, crying in a van for 36 hours. I'd rather figure out how we're going to creatively shoot a music video in an Airbnb in New Mexico, like it just, we were all very quickly on the same page and just like, yeah, it sounds way better to make the best out of a bad situation than to just like put our tail between our legs and go home.
Wow. That's really intense, because like if you're one day with everything that is perfectly fine and then the next day or maybe even like within hours and everything is like everyone is wearing their masks and gloves, it's really really challenging to like, you know, get through that. So that was like a good way for you guys to get through it.
I I'm glad we handled it the way we did. And yeah, it has been a surreal year, but it has been for everyone. And like our experiences haven't been the same. Um, when all of this was starting, a lot of people were posting that we're in the same boat, and a lot of folks were getting really angry about that. For I mean, everybody's world was collapsing, and a lot of people were without work. I have friends who are in like food service, and they're bartenders and this and that, and like all of a sudden their fruitful career that allowed them to pay their rent out here is like gone. And so a lot of people, I don't know if it's worthy of anger necessarily, but a lot of people were frustrated about the whole same boat analogy. And I like to look at it as like, yeah, we're in different boats, but we're in the same storm, which,
Mhm.
you know, doesn't make it better. It doesn't mean that in certain areas, maybe I have it better than person B or like whatever, but we all are kind of like experiencing this together from different perspectives. And so, I'd like to think that most of us are approaching every single speed bump in a similar manner to the way we did, which is just like, okay, this is happening. How are we going to make the best of it and make sure that like we're doing it in the safest way that's not going to like negatively impact the people around us or our families or us, like I think that's the pragmatic way to look at it.
So during the pandemic, have you done any live streams like on social media or anything like that?
Yeah, mostly I've done acoustic ones, and then we did a couple kind of those pre-record performances that you do for like radio stations and stuff like that. We have a good friend Debbie Mazzella back on the East Coast, who program directs a radio station in New Jersey, and so she invited us to be a part of their summer concert series. So we did one of those. But really, I've been trying to wrap my head around getting the quality of our live streaming to be a little bit better before I start doing it a ton. And at the same time, there was a lot of music that was kind of in the works, like recorded music that was in the works that I was going to basically finish up when coming back from tour. So that was something that I focused on a lot at first. And then a few opportunities to create brand new stuff arose. They're the type of opportunities that I just couldn't say no to. Perhaps even once in a lifetime opportunities, because a lot of people found themselves with extra time on their hands. And so we're open to kind of like, providing more feedback from industry perspectives, that maybe they wouldn't have the time to do normally. So it kind of became a creation year, if that makes sense. And so it's funny, we're doing this interview on New Year's Eve, and so I've been reflecting on the year quite a bit and looking forward into what I want 2021 to be and trying to manifest that energy. And there's going to be a lot of new music in 2021, and I will say that I will be working to get our live streaming up and running a little bit more regularly as well.
All right, that's awesome. So you've been working on a lot on your music lately?
Yeah, I'm super thankful to have a home studio. And so I can continue to create. I can basically do everything except drums in that room. And thankfully, for a lot of the stuff that we had in the works, we had already recorded drums for those songs. So I was able to finish those up. And then the one song that did come out of the blue this year that needed live drums, um, I definitely talked about this with Art before even approaching this guy, but there is a guy who has a home studio drum setup, and he's a really great drummer and engineer. So he does basically like virtual drum sessions over Zoom. So that's how we handled that at that point, because Art and I didn't feel comfortable going into a studio at that time, although they were technically open. Um, and we just weren't going to get the quality of sounds out of our lockout that the song actually needed. So I'm thankful that Art was open-minded to that, and that I have the ability to create from home. Otherwise it would have been a pretty boring year.
So now that you mentioned art, I kind of remembered that you guys had a third member, Kelsey Mira, for like a while, right? So what happened there?
Yeah, so Kelsey is still a really good friend. Basically how that started is that she and I were co-writing a few songs together. Um, Funny enough, the first of those songs will be the first that we release next year. And she and I met at a music conference, and we were both in this very small panel session with a mix engineer, a really amazing mix engineer and producer named Greg Wells. And she asked a question that I thought was super intelligent. I asked a question as well. I'm not sure how she felt about it or if she noticed or whatever. But after the panel, I just kind of went up and I was like, "Hey, great question, by the way. I did not think to ask that." Like, and we struck up a conversation. And she was living in Cincinnati at the time, so I asked if she was sticking around after the conference. Um, and turns out she was around for a week. So we found an afternoon and we tried co-writing, and it turned out really, really great. Um, so we were continuing to co-write, and a month later she moved to LA, which was a pleasant surprise. And just kind of as we were working on a couple of Ship's songs, I was just like, hey, like, you play keys, you have a great voice. Do you like, would you be interested in sitting in on a couple rehearsals? Like, do you like the music? Would you be interested in playing a couple shows with us? And so she wasn't a member for like a while, I would say. I would say it was kind of like we tried it out. And I think from her perspective, it was a little bit of a different vibe than maybe what she was expecting going into it. Like, she was, and the conversation was very like easy and amicable. Like, I'm not gonna, you know, force anybody to stay on stage with us or whatever. And we still write and create together and all of that stuff. And she's still a very good friend. But, like, you try things out, and if they're not like gelling the way they're supposed to gel, then no harm, no foul. It it also, Art and I are super compact when we go out on the road. Like, we can share a hotel room. We can fit, like, if it's just us, we can fit us and all of our gear in a minivan. Um, and it just is really, really convenient as
Mhm.
we're doing this DIY thing to be a duo. And so, even as Kelsey was having her own concerns, um, kind of stylistically and not being the front person of a project, Art and I were kind of having conversations. We were just like, yeah, we really like having her on stage. Her vocal is like great, and it's nice having a keyboard player, but what is our game plan going to be for touring? So, like, logistically speaking, it causes a wrinkle. And yeah, so she played like maybe 2 or 3 shows with us, which were super, super fun. And then we kind of all decided, for very different reasons coming from each perspective, that maybe the live show was not something that was going to be like the greatest fit for her.
How do you get inspiration for your music? Like what inspires you?
um Lots of things. I usually pull inspiration from, you know, my past, my present, pondering about my future, and then also like observing the world around me. And, you know, really just the human condition is quite a fascinating thing. And the best ideas really just kind of like find me. I don't know how else to explain it than that. They just kind of like something will pop into my head, whether it's like a lyrical concept or a melody, or sometimes, very occasionally, and this is both nice and also really challenging, but sometimes the whole thing will kind of like pop into my head and I'm like, oh, that's like how it needs to be. But it can present, so it's like cool because it's like all kind of finished and it just kind of like trickles out. But then producing it and getting it to sound exactly the way you heard it in your head can be quite a challenge.
When you get that inspiration, do you typically write it down or do you go like immediately to the studio, or what is that process like for you? What do you do?
Yeah, it super depends on whether I'm near the studio. If I'm not near the studio, usually I'll just use a voice note. I use this app called Evernote where you can record an audio note, but you can also write text. So if I have really strong lyrical ideas, or if I feel like the voice note will need explaining for like how I'm hearing it in my head, I'll put all those notes down as text, and then I'll usually sing in whatever melody as an audio, like an audio voice note. Um, it's it's more common this year than most times that I am near my studio, but I still tend to use voice notes. But in normal times when you're out and about and like whatever, ideas will come to me when I'm like on the sidewalk, flying on an airplane, on the freeway, like really inopportune times to like write them down. So I have become very, very reliant on, quick voice memos and just trying to like jot down enough information that'll like keep me in that zone and bring back whatever it was that popped into my head at the time.
So what artists inspire you?
That would be a super, super, super long list. But lately I've been listening to a lot of Andrew McMahon. I really love his songwriting, and he works with some great producers as well. Um, let's see, who else? Bleachers, I've been really digging. Haim, I think, are like awesome. I really like Churches. Um, let's see, there's way too many. I
That's
music
okay, don't
music
worry.
inspires me, like just generally speaking. Oh, I have to throw this in there. I haven't really dug in fully to the latest Taylor Swift, but Folklore I thought was a brilliant record, and I thought that her working so much with Aaron Dessner from The National was a really, really interesting and brilliant move on her part, because it just lends a little bit more, like a less glossy, more authentic feeling vibe to the whole thing that I think she as an artist really benefited from. Like, I know she can do the glossy pop well. She can do like the country pop well. We've all heard her like develop over time. And I just thought that this was a really beautiful next step for her. So I really enjoyed that record and I'm looking forward to digging into the next one.
What advice or tips would you give to people interested in music that just want to, that they just want to pursue music? What would you say to them?
That's probably a long answer too. I guess the biggest thing that I've been struggling with as this project has kind of like taken our little baby steps every single year is because the music industry is a hard thing to pursue, right? Like success, like commercial success as a musician is really, really hard to accomplish. And there's a lot of rejections along the way and a lot of speed bumps, and just the whole thing is really hard. It's hard being out on a DIY tour. It's a lot of work to, you know, load in your own gear, do your own sound, especially depending on what caliber of sound the venue has, um, perform a show. Like, uh, mingle with people, try to sell merch, tear everything down, load it into a van, and then go get sleep and then drive yourself to your next stop. It's a grind. So I guess my advice would be like, check in with yourself as you are pursuing it, right? And make sure that you can remember almost at all times. There's going to be moments when you're just like, oh, why the hell am I doing this? But make sure that you can remember 90% of the time why it is that you're doing this, because we all do this from some need to, right? Like, and as I'm going through those low moments, I always try to check in with myself and be like, can you imagine a world where a song idea enters your head and you didn't go into the studio and bring it to life? And the answer always for me is no. Like, I cannot imagine that world. So I have decided that, like, regardless of, whether we eventually wind up, I'll say financially independent as musicians, um, I'm gonna do it anyway because it's like a part of me, and it's, I can't imagine me without it. And so how that looks and how it manifests itself, it might change year over year because life changes, and you have to adjust. It changed this year, um, but this particular year it changed in such a way that I wound up finding myself pursuing it even more actively, I would say, even than if we were on, a tour every quarter, because a tour is like 2 weeks and then you come back and then you rest. This year has been like, there has hardly been a week that I haven't been laser focused on something musical. So yeah, that's all I would say is like, you never want to lose sight of what brought you here to begin with. And almost definitely, I would say that if your desire to pursue music comes from any place of like purity, that initial thing is some sort of passion, right? So the minute you stop feeling passionate about it, it's time to at least take a break and reflect. And and if you're in it for fame and fortune, I mean, Wall Street or like software or like many things are probably easier to pursue than music, and get paid a lot more for it.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation that we've had today?
Um, no, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and I just want to say thank you for thinking of me for this. It's been really a fun conversation. Thank you for letting me ramble, because I know that I do that. And as we're on the final day of 2020 and looking into 2021, which isn't a magical switch that's going to flip and make everything better, but what I will
Absolutely
say
not.
is that energy and intentions do have some magic to them. And so let's all set our energy and set our intentions to anything positive, and just like going into this next year and watching things balance out and slowly get better. They're not going to get better overnight, but I have a feeling that if we all put our minds to it, we can find some sort of balance. Let's just say 6 months from now, and things can kind of go back to normal. I would love that.
Absolutely. I think we would all love that. Would you like to share your social media platform handles?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can find us everywhere at Ships Have Sailed. Our website, shipsofsailed.com, is a great place to start because it has all of them conveniently as little links. And if you want to go the extra mile to support us, of course, after exploring our music and making sure that you like it and you're feeling what we're doing, we are very focused on building our Patreon platform this year. which you can find at patreon.com/ships have sailed. And there's lots of really cool behind the scenes content and experiences. I will say that our inner circle, which is what I call that, have actually heard the first single that will be released next year, as well as several others that we've been working on. So I'm basically trying to use that as a way to bring people into our process a little bit. And it's been super, super fun. It's grown into quite a lovely little community. And it's, you know, it was a little bit nerve-wracking at first because I wasn't familiar with the platform and I didn't know how I was going to like maintain the content and like, who's going to be in there. But I will say that the people who have joined our inner circle have been lovely. Like they're amazing people, and it's become a nice little warm community. And they support each other as much as they support me, which is just super heartwarming to see.
Well, thank you, Will, for letting me interview you. This was a very great conversation that we had. And thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to seeing the final product. And here's to balance in the new year.